What is going on, folks? It is Dr. Remy LeBeau, and I'm coming at you once again from the X-Layer to provide you my deep and insightful thoughts into something that was surprisingly really fucking good. This first season of Interview with the Vampire. Now, Interview with the Vampire is a favorite book of mine. I read all of the vampire books when I was a kid. I read Interview with the Vampire. I read The Vampire Lestat. I read The Queen of the Damned. And I read Tale of the Body Thief. Those were the four that were out. Actually, the fourth one came out after I read the first three, but those were the ones that were out when I first started reading these books. And I fell in love with the world. I fell in love with the characters. Lestat, Louis, Armand, Marius, just like every character. So I've loved this series forever, and like they've continued, like Anne Rice continued it. Here's a couple more. Vampire Armand, haven't read that yet. The Memnoch the Devil, I believe I did read this one. And then there's I have 8 more on the shelf that are apparently part of the series as well. So the series has continued. I've been meaning to finally just get back into it and get a whole sort of clear adult perspective on the series, because I loved it as a kid, and I figured I would love it as an adult. And they adapted Interview with the Vampire with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. That was a good movie. I've enjoyed going back to see it a few times. That was the movie where Kirsten Dunst was first introduced, who played Mary Jane in the Spider-Man films of the 2000s, of the aughts. So, the movie, it made an impression, but they never made a sequel to it. They never made the Vampire Lestat. They never made it. They made a separate movie of Queen of the Damned, which wasn't great. I'm going to be honest. The book is better. If you've read the book, the book is better than the movie. The movie was fine. I mean, obviously, Aaliyah was in it, and then she died right afterwards, and that is a significant moment for Aaliyah and Aaliyah fans, and sort of that fan base. But beyond that, the movie really did fall flat. And it just kind of killed the momentum of, I guess, ever adapting this stuff at that time. Because there hasn't been anything. But then over the years, you heard rumblings, you heard rumors, just like with The Dark Tower, where, there was going to be a whole television show, and there was going to be movies, and it was going to be this whole thing that never took off. And then they made a shitty movie, and that was awful. So Anne Rice, The Vampire Chronicles, you hear stuff, things are happening, not happening, not happening. You lose all faith at some point. At least that's what I did. I lost all faith, and that was that. I moved forward. And then I heard that AMC was going to do this. So what I've heard is that they are going to take both the Vampire Chronicles and the Mayfair Witches Chronicles, which is another series of hers that's sort of interwoven into the vampire world, but it involves witches, and kind of make a universe out of it. I think this is their big swing beyond The Walking Dead, because The Walking Dead, the main show is about to end, and then they have some spin-offs, but they need some fresh blood, so to speak. And so they actually committed to creating a cohesive universe of the vampire books, of the Vampire Chronicles. And they call it the Immortal Universe. And all prior, rumors about things like this happening, I didn't think much of it because, I thought, they haven't really pulled this off ever, and are they actually going to pull it off this time? So, all of a sudden, I hear the Interview with the Vampire is in production. I was like, whoa. Okay, so they're actually shooting this thing. Okay, all right. I heard the dude from Game of Thrones was in it, Grey Worm. He was going to play Louis. Now, he is a black person. The character is traditionally white. And so I knew that would be an issue for people. Not for me. I don't give a fuck. Tell me the story. Give me some good characters. Give me some good characterization. Maybe tweak it a little if you need to. I'm fine with it as long as it's good. So whatever, I don't hear anything for a while. Then all of a sudden there's a trailer. It's cool. It looks good, but is it going to be good? Who knows? You know, like, can you really know for sure? Now, I want to say this now for people that have not watched the show. I am going to start talking spoilers very soon. In fact, I'm going to start talking spoilers right now. So if you have not seen the show, please just do yourself a favor. Put this video on hold. Go watch the show. Like, watch it, because not spoilers. I fucking loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and that's why I'm making this video. I thought it was utterly fantastic, and I am so fucking happy with it. And I think you're going to have a really good time with it. And just let yourself enjoy that without knowing much about what is actually presented in the show. But for those of you that have seen it, I'm about to spoil the shit out of it because it's worth fucking talking about. So, my goodness, I just watched the first half of Interview with the Vampire, right? They adapted the first half of Interview with the Vampire. And it's an interesting adaptation because it's not exactly like the books, which I like because I'm surprised by a lot of what I see, but I'm also familiar with it. So it does do both things of like kind of making me comfortable, but also uncomfortable at the same time, which I enjoy, you know? So, the first sort of big change is the interviewer, right? In the movie and in the book, and in the original book, the vampire, Louis, de Lioncourt. Oh no, is that Louis? I forget his last name. De Lioncourt is Lestat, his maker. Which, by the way, played amazingly by this dude. I mean, did such a great job. I love him. I'm in love. I'm in love with the performance. He did such a great job. Anyway, Louis is being interviewed by this dude, right? Like, he approaches this dude and he's like, I want you to interview me, and I'm a vampire. And the guy collects stories, or is a journalist or a writer, whatever, and the story's told. In this version, that already happened, and now we're having a second session years later. So in the book, he turns down the interviewer at the end to turn him into a vampire. And that's referenced here. So there's mention of a story that was told to him, the interviewer, and there are tapes of it, and that they are played. But the interviewer is now interviewing Louis again in his older age. So there's this interesting kind of dynamic between them in the present, which is interesting. That's something that was not in the books. And so in this version, Louis basically says, like, I wasn't completely truthful then about everything that happened, and I'm not being completely truthful now. I'm giving you a version of events that sort of is a story, and some of it is true and some of it isn't. And that ultimately kind of establishes, like, what we are listening to is not exactly the story, and it's a version of the story. So it sort of uses that mechanism within the narrative to kind of comment on the fact that it is itself a version of the story, and it is not the exact story that you expect. But nonetheless, it is that story. Because it's still fucking Louis, and he's still talking about his life, becoming a vampire, spending time with Lestat, them turning Claudia, etc., etc. So we have that, and then we get into this. We start getting into the past, and there's just a beautiful. So Louis is black, so we deal with that in the story, and the story doesn't take place in I guess Reconstruction times in the South. Oh no, this was not Reconstruction time. This was before the Civil War because there were slaves there, so it had to have happened prior to 1865. So. It's somewhere in like the middle to earlier part of the 19th century that the original takes place. This takes place like in the turn of the 20th century. And I really like that, it put in a different era. I think in part, you get away from all the slavery shit that black folks don't need to be exposed to all the time, because there's enough of that shit. And even though there's racism in New Orleans where it's set, it's not like black people are being treated like dogs, you see black folks have gotten their footing, and they're trying to make their way in the world, and black and white folks are still being fucking pricks, but you know, there's a level of reverence for the black folks of this era and their culture and sort of their culture within New Orleans, and that's all very celebrated. I love that. I fucking loved it. Louis has his sort of role within this. Lestat comes to town. He turns him, right? He identifies him as somebody that he wants as his partner. and then he turns him. And then ultimately they wind up having like a homosexual relationship. Like a legitimate one, because in the books it was implied, in the movie it was implied, but it was never explicit, because I think it was the time period, you know? In the time, I mean, like, we're just getting out of the 70s where, I mean, homosexuality was still considered a mental illness in the United States. So, you know, Anne Rice is sort of, she's like dancing around it, right? Like, she's talking about it, but she's not explicitly talking about it. And in this show, it's like, okay, we're in 2022 now. It's like, we can talk about this and we can be explicit about it. So they were, and whether or not that was Anne Rice's intent or not, it's like, I don't give a fuck, because it fits, it works. And they're not just in love, like just in this weird kind of vampiric way, but they're also in love as human beings. But it's a crooked love, right? It's a dysfunctional love. Lestat is fucked up. Like, he's a villain, but he's also not. You know, like, he can love passionately, but he's a horrible monster. Louis tries not to be the monster, and they sort of have their dynamic, and we see it kind of play out, and then we see stuff with Louis' family, and sort of how his vampiric turn affects them, and how he ultimately becomes ostracized by them. The fact that the town knows that they're lovers, but they don't talk about it, but they do talk about it. And then they ultimately think they're evil because they have been around for a long time and they're not really aging. So all these different elements are at play, and at the center of it is this love story between Lestat and Louis, and I think it's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful gay love stories I've ever seen. It's depicted so like reverently, like it's just so authentic and just genuine, you know. Like, there's no shame in it. There's no caricatures. It's just like love between these two men who are vampires. So I love that whole aspect of it. I love the production design of the thing. It's gorgeous, like New Orleans, and then you have also the interiors of the various places that they frequent and they live in. So beautiful. Everything is gorgeous. Love looking at it. You know, I love looking at the world of this show that they've created. It's just fantastic. And then ultimately we have Claudia introduced. Now, in the books, like, you know, the Claudia thing is played one way, and that is the way they played it in the movie. But in this, it's played a little bit differently. Like, she's a little bit older, even though she's still 14, I believe. She feels older, and she looks older. And the girl that plays her is phenomenal. She's also black. Hey, great, whatever, who cares? I mean, she's Claudia. She's straight up Claudia. And she's like having, you know, the turmoil of like not really understanding her place, not really knowing what she's supposed to be doing and how she's supposed to be doing it, going too far in some ways, and in some ways not going far enough in her vampirism. And there's this interesting aspect. I'm pretty sure there were these extra in the books, there were extra powers that vampires had. Some vampires had certain powers and other vampires had others. In this, the powers are very like explicit, and they're potent. They can read each other's minds, except if you're the maker of somebody, you can't read their mind. So Lestat cannot read Louis' mind, and he makes Claudia, so he can't read her mind either. So they can communicate telepathically, but he can't, which is an interesting element of the story. And then, you know, you have kind of the ability to can control other people, like that are human. And then ultimately we see Lestat can fly, and anyway, so like that element is in there as well. So it adds it's a fun ingredient into this show that gives it kind of an interesting vampiric spin. They also made mention of the fact that over time you can be in the sun, which is an interesting concept. Anyway, so we have the whole dynamic with the three of them play out. Claudia ultimately leaves for a while. That never happened in the book. She leaves by herself and then comes back after she has her own sort of a finding herself kind of situation. And then when she comes back, she tries to take Louis, and then Lestat just cripples Louis. Lestat then leaves, and then he comes back because he won't leave them alone. Claudia tries to leave. He won't let her. It was drawn out, but it was exactly what I always wanted, kind of from the original stories. I just wanted more, and this show gave me more. So all that plays out, and ultimately Claudia wants to kill Lestat, and she gets Louis to help her, and so that takes us to this finale, right? What I didn't know was, first I didn't know it was the finale. I didn't know this season was going to be a part 1. So there's 7 episodes in this season. I didn't realize that we're only doing part 1 of this book. It was curious because I was thinking if they're going to do the Vampire Lestat, Louis is in it, but he doesn't have a huge role. And clearly Louis is the main character in Interview with the Vampire, the television show, the AMC show. And so how are they going to play with that dynamic? Clearly they're telling a different version of the story, just like they did with Game of Thrones and George R.R. Martin's books. So I respect that they can go anywhere, and clearly they wanted to focus on this book, at least initially for the first 2 seasons, because the second half will be will again conclude this story. So that's going to be really interesting. But then where do they go from there? I'm just captivated by the idea because there's so much story to be told. Queen of the Damned, the Vampire Lestat, Tale of the Body Thief, Memnoch the Devil, and then I guess the Vampire Armand, etc. These are big tales, and they're not all about the characters that we are focusing on in this particular show, at least not to the extent. So it's going to be interesting to see where they take it from here. Anyway, I didn't know this was going to be the end of the season. And I think they did a great job picking the right moment to end it. They completely changed up how they got rid of Lestat, but they didn't really get rid of Lestat because they kind of showed him at the end surviving what he's been through, and we all know that he survives. But I just love the execution of the whole thing. And then ultimately Lestat had another vampire that he created, and that's how he found out they were trying to kill him. And so you think he's not going to be killed, but then Claudia was ahead of him. Claudia is this chess master, and she's several moves ahead of him, and she's all about checkmating, and he's all about trying to sneak his way. And they did a whole chess visual metaphor thing throughout the last few episodes. So it all kind of coalesced together on a thematic level and explicit level to something really fantastic as far as I'm concerned. I love the sort of the tortured, divisive kind of ambivalence of Louis with respect to Lestat. He loves him, but he hates him, but he loves him, but he hates him, but he loves him, but he hates him, and it's so authentic. And the dude that plays him is so good. Grey Worm, I need to learn his name because he's amazing. He does such a great job of playing Louis in this show. I'm just floored by it. Him, Claudia, Lestat, love them. Anyway, so we have the situation. They leave finally. They leave New Orleans, and it sort of ends. We come back to the present, and there's this dude that's been in the present with Louis, and we think he's a familiar of Louis, he's the human, kind of the what's that guy's name from Dracula? Ring. The guy that eats the bugs. I forget his name. It starts with an R. Anyway, you kind of assume that this is the relationship of this dude that's with Louis. And then ultimately you realize, oh wait, no, he's a vampire. He's also a vampire. Because we go back in a flashback I think to when Louis first meets the interviewer when he's younger, and we see this guy who we think is Louis familiar with Louis, and he looks the same. So clearly he doesn't age. He's a vampire. Then we kind of see him in this episode, kind of exhibiting vampire powers. And then at the very fucking end, he's introduced as the vampire fucking Armand. The vampire Armand, baby. That's right. A vampire who has his own book, The Vampire Armand, right fucking there. And you're just like, whoa, like mind blown. Wow, I can't believe this. Like, this is real. Like, you have this guy who's the vampire Armand. Louis is like, this is the love of my life, Armand. And it's like, fuck yeah. I'm pretty sure I remember at some point towards like the tail end of what I was reading, maybe it was in Memnoch the Devil, which is the 5th book, that Louis was with Armand, but I didn't remember that. I thought Armand died in the theater of the vampires, right? In Interview with the Vampire, but he did not die. That's right. I mean, anyway, it's just so intriguing, the idea that, because this is definitely an element of the story that was developed later beyond Interview with the Vampire, the book, which means that the showrunners have like a clear view of exactly where they're going. They have the whole story together based on what they're adapting. And so they've already taken it in the present to the point where Louis is with Armand. So we're going to see the whole backstory to that the next season. Claudia and him are going to go to France. They're going to go, first they're going to go all through Europe. They're going to wind up in France, and they're going to encounter the Theater of the Vampire. So Louis will meet Armand, and then that whole thing will play out. And then ultimately, spoilers, he's going to kill Claudia, right? And that's going to be heartbreaking. But that's not going to happen yet. We get Claudia for probably a good amount of the next season, which is exciting. I wonder what's going to be happening with Lestat next season. I wonder if next season they'll start the Vampire Lestat. Like maybe in the present they could do the Vampire Lestat, and in the past they could do Louis going to France and meeting Armand and whatnot. That would be interesting. I don't know how it's going to go. However it goes, though, I'm all in on this. I love it. I can't wait to see more. I hope it's successful. Not many people are talking about it, but the people that have seen it love it, except for except for some people that I've seen that are annoyed that things were changed. But it's like, I don't care about what they think, and I don't care if there's changes, as long as the changes are good. If the changes are bad and you're telling a story badly and your acting's bad and nobody cares enough to do a good job, then that sucks. But if you're changing the story but it winds up being really good, then hey, I got a different version of a story that I like, that I also like, and for me that's a success. So anyway, I'm very excited about what's going to happen next. I look forward to it. I hope it happens soon. Don't take forever. Please, AMC, bring this show out as soon as possible. I want to see more of this. I want to finally see the Vampire Lestat adapted properly, and then we can go into Queen of the Damned, and everything will just work so much better. And then we go into Tale of the Body Thief, which is fucking awesome. I love Tale of the Body Thief. There is a body thief, someone that can take the body of somebody, and this body thief takes the body of Lestat. I mean, you probably know that already, but so Louis gets involved again in the present, trying to help Lestat get his body back, etc. So it's like, there's so many good things coming, and I don't even know what's coming after that, because, I know about Memnoch the Devil. Memnoch the Devil is an interesting sort of story. It involves a lot of religious things, and it kind of goes back to Jesus times, and it's an interesting story. And then beyond that, the Vampire Armand, I don't know where it goes. I have all the books. I'm intending to read them all. And I don't know if I will at this point, because if they're going to make them all, then I won't, because I'll just let the stories play out here, and then maybe I'll go back to the books. Because I don't really want too many more things spoiled for me. I want to just kind of let the show unfold. I'm just glad the show exists, and I look forward to many more episodes for me to suck the blood out of. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out my video. Thanks for checking out my channel. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. And as always, I want to remind everybody that if you haven't already, you better put an X in the box, because ain't nobody checking me. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.